Self-deception isn't a personal failure. It's a human pattern. One that shows up quietly, often without permission, and usually when something inside us feels too heavy to face all at once. If you've ever ignored a truth you already knew, postponed a decision you felt coming, or softened reality just enough to make it bearable, that wasn't stupidity. That was protection. It's okay if this feels familiar. It's okay if you recognize yourself here. And no, you're not weak, broken, or alone. And that's the part people don't talk about. Self-deception works because the brain is not designed to chase truth at all costs. It's designed to keep you functional, safe, regulated, alive. When reality threatens your sense of stability, identity, or belonging, the brain doesn't ask, "Is this true?" It asks, "Can you handle this right now?" And if the answer is no, it edits the story. Neuroscience backs this up. The brain constantly filters information through emotional relevance. Areas like the amygdala and prefrontal cortex work together to reduce psychological threat. When something feels overwhelming, emotional pain, cognitive dissonance, fear of loss, the brain can downplay, distort, or temporarily ignore it. Not to lie to you, but to prevent overload. In other words, self-deception isn't about denial. It's about pacing. You knew something wasn't right, but knowing fully, all at once, might have shattered something you weren't ready to rebuild yet. So the mind softened the edges, delayed the impact, bought time. And here's the uncomfortable truth, that delay often saves people. Studies in psychology have shown that mild positive illusions, small distortions of reality, can increase short-term resilience. They help people get out of bed, go to work, stay in relationships long enough to survive emotionally difficult periods. In trauma research, this is sometimes called adaptive denial. Not because it's ideal, but because it's functional. So yes, there's a side of self-deception that protects you. It protects you from collapsing under grief you can't process yet, from identity loss that would leave you unanchored, from fear that would freeze your ability to act. If I told you that your mind did this to keep you standing, would that change how harshly you judge yourself? But here's where the story turns. What protects you temporarily can quietly imprison you long-term. Because the brain doesn't automatically know when to stop. What starts as a buffer becomes a pattern. What begins as emotional anesthesia slowly turns into numbness. And the danger of self-deception isn't that it hides the truth, it's that it keeps you living around it. Over time, the cost shows up in subtle ways. You feel stuck, but can't explain why. You repeat choices that don't align with what you say you want. You feel exhausted by decisions you never consciously made. Cognitive science calls this motivated reasoning, when we unconsciously favor interpretations that protect our emotional comfort, even when evidence points elsewhere. The brain becomes invested in maintaining the story, because changing it would mean facing discomfort it has learned to avoid. And here's the part that rarely gets said. Self-deception isn't passive. It requires energy. Maintaining an internal narrative that doesn't quite match reality creates cognitive load. That's why people who live in prolonged self-deception often feel mentally tired, emotionally irritable, or strangely disconnected from themselves. The mind is constantly managing inconsistencies, even if you're not consciously aware of them. So yes, it works. But it works like painkillers work. They help you function. They don't heal the injury. The real risk isn't that you're lying to yourself. It's that you start organizing your life around what you can't see clearly. Relationships, careers, habits, all quietly shaped by something unexamined. And eventually, the gap between who you are and what you're avoiding becomes too loud to ignore. So how do you balance this? Not by ripping the illusion away. Not by forcing brutal honesty overnight. That usually backfires. The nervous system resists sudden threat, even if it's truth. The healthier path is gradual awareness.
You don't ask, "What am I lying about?" You ask, What feels slightly uncomfortable to admit? You notice patterns instead of accusing yourself. You get curious instead of confrontational. Research on emotional regulation shows that the brain integrates difficult truths better when they are approached with safety. This is why journaling, therapy, or reflective dialogue works. They create space where awareness doesn't feel like danger. Self-deception loosens its grip when you prove to yourself that you can survive clarity. And that's the key: safety first, truth second. If you're starting to feel that self-deception is no longer protecting you, that it's costing you peace, direction, or connection, that matters. That's not weakness. That's a signal. Because when self-deception stops being a shield and starts becoming a wall, it can be the early sign of something deeper: anxiety disorders, depression, avoidance cycles that reinforce themselves over time. And no one talks about this enough. If you notice that reality feels consistently overwhelming, or that avoiding truth feels necessary just to get through the day, reaching out for help isn't overreacting. It's prevention. It's clarity with support. You don't need to tear the illusion down alone. You don't need to rush insight. You just need a place where honesty feels safe again. Self-deception chose you for a reason. But it doesn't have to stay in control. Understanding that, not condemning it, is where real change begins.